Hello and welcome back. It's time to add our own content to this app, replacing this generated text that says the world is your oyster. So let's get rid of this HTML code. Incidentally, you may wonder why we need this Ion content tag. What Ion content provides is support for scrolling. Remember, we're writing a mobile app, and mobile phones may have smaller screens compared to laptops or desktop computers. So it's more likely that our content won't fit into the screen and the user will need to be able to scroll down. Now, of course, any regular web page allows scrolling as well, but in this case, we don't want everything to scroll. Our header should always be visible at the top. It's only the content that should be scrollable. That's why Ionic provides these Ion header and Ion content components. That said, what should we add here? Well, our love calculator will need a couple of input fields where the user can enter the names of the two persons for which to calculate how much they love each other, right? So let's go to the Ionic components documentation. Let me put a full screen so you can see the preview in the phone frame as well. The components we're interested in are inputs. So here's the first example of input fields. The nice thing about this preview frame is that we can also interact with it. So here we can enter some text. You can see that this is a basic input field with some placeholder text. But if we scroll down, there are other examples of possible ways we can use inputs, like we can have fixed labels. So in this case, username is a fixed label that always stays on the left, while we can enter a value on the right. Or we can use floating labels. Let's see how these work. In this case, username looks like a placeholder, but when we put the focus on the field, the label moves up and becomes smaller with a nice animation effect. And here we can type whatever we like. I quite like these floating labels. Let's use this example. So let's copy this code snippet. Let's go back to our editor and paste it here. Let me indent this properly and remove the empty lines just so that I can fit more code that you can see on the screen. If we save this, we can see the input fields saying username and password. And if we click on the field, the label floats above the field. Good. Now let's look at this code that we just copied and pasted. It's not just two input fields. We have an Ion list. So this is a list component used to display one or more rows of content. And each row is wrapped by an Ion item component. Displaying things in rows is very common, of course, especially in mobile apps. So Ion list together with Ion items is something we'll use very often. Each item contains an Ion label and an Ion input. These Ionic components are very similar to the standard HTML label and input elements. But of course, a standard HTML label doesn't have a floating attribute, providing that nice animation effect. So that's an example of extra functionality provided by the Ionic components, but they also take care of styling these elements so that they look more like native mobile widgets. Now, of course, for our love calculator, we don't need username and password. We want, let's say, name1 and name2. The second input should also be of type text. Note that we can set a type attribute on an Ion input component, just like with a regular HTML input element. Right, at this point we can enter two names like Romeo and Juliet. And that's pretty much all we can do right now. So our next step will be to add some more components here to display the results of calculating the love score between these two names. We'll see how to do that in the next video, but as an exercise, if you like, you can try doing it yourself first, because you've seen pretty much how it works. We can look at the Ionic documentation, find some suitable component to display what we want, and simply copy and modify the example, right? So here, after the inputs, we'll want to display a card component. That's what you need to look up in the Ionic docs. And a card can have a header where you can display Romeo and Juliet just as placeholder text for now. And as the content, we'll display the result of our calculation, for example, 99%. So see if you can do this on your own, and we'll see a solution in the next video. I'll see you later.